Hello and welcome to Nbyula Talks. Before we begin, we have a few updates and reminders for you. We would love to have you be part of our Nbyula community. And you can do so by logging on to www.nbyula.com, where you can join communities related to your area of interest, register for upcoming Nbyula Talks, book one-to-one skylifts, and view other upcoming events. You can also take this opportunity to connect with fellow learners or the speaker by sending a connection request. When you connect with the speaker, you will be able to contact them directly as well as receive updates about their upcoming talks. Kindly note that during this session, you will not be able to switch on your camera or unmute your mic. To ask questions during the talk, go to the audience chat, type your question, and select Post Your Question. If your question has not been answered during the talk, you will be notified once it's been answered, or if your question has not been answered during the talk, you can go to www.nbyula.com and spin a quest, and your questions will be answered. Thank you for joining us today. We hope this talk broadens your horizons and takes you to new learning heights. Hi everyone, welcome to another Nbyula Talk. My name is Sarah, and today we'll be going through part 2 questions, two-part questions of the IELTS Writing Exam. All right, so I can see a lot of new faces here today, so welcome to all of you guys. Thank you for joining us. Okay, and before we get started, I would just like to share a poll. All right, just to get us talking, just to get us going. And the poll is, give it a minute to come up. Getting straight into the topic, what do you find most difficult about the IELTS Writing Section Task 2? So the options that we have here are coming up with ideas to write about, developing ideas, unable to reach the word count, unable to answer the question, or other. If you have another reason, go ahead and type it down. Okay, in that time I will share my screen, so go ahead. What do you feel is the most difficult part about writing task 2? Okay. We'll also just go ahead and talk about these for a minute before we get into today's talk. So a lot of people might find it difficult to come up with an idea to write about. So when you're practicing, you might have the question and you might feel like it's a little difficult to come up with an idea how to start. So that's definitely a problem that, will make it a bit more difficult for you to attempt writing task 2. Second of all, developing ideas. So you might have an idea, you might see the question, you might get really excited about it, and then coming up with something to give examples about it, or just develop it even further. That might be a difficult thing for you as well. That's totally okay. Also, you're unable to reach the word count. So as we go through the talk, we'll discuss the word count, but maybe you're unable to get to the word count of the section. That might be difficult for you. Or you're unable to answer the question. Maybe you see the question on the test day, practice day, you might be fine, but on the test day, you might not be able to answer the question. So these could be some ideas as to why you might find the IELTS Writing Task 2 difficult. Okay, I see that a lot of people they find it difficult because they are unable to reach the word count. Okay, right. All right, guys, so that was just a fun little poll for you. So getting on to today's talk, we are going to learn how to answer the IELTS Academic Writing Task 2, Part 2 questions. All right, so before we get into that, let's just understand a little bit more about the IELTS exam. For those of you who are new, this will just be a little bit more information about the exam. For those of you who are experienced and you know about the exam, this will just be a little bit of a recap for you. All right, so IELTS stands for International English Language Testing System, and it's for those non-native English language speakers who are looking to work, study, or migrate abroad. All right, so this test tests your 4 language skills, which are your reading, your listening, your speaking, and your writing. All right, and today we'll be looking at the writing part and mostly task 2. Okay, Oops. All right. So the IELTS academic writing section, task 2. Again, there are task 1 and task 2, and today we'll be looking at task 2. You have 40 minutes to complete this section, this part of the task, rather, in 250 words. And again, you're using the formal style of writing. So we say 40 minutes here because you already have task 1, where we say you spend 20 minutes. So the total time that you have for the writing section is 1 hour. And this is divided into 20 minutes and 40 minutes roughly. So we say spend 40 minutes because this task is a bit longer depending on the question that you get, but it is longer. So it's advised that you spend at least 40 minutes on this task. Again, 250 words is what you're supposed to achieve when you're writing this. Anything under, and there will be a penalty for that. So 250 words and or a little bit more is totally fine for this section. And again, you're using the formal tone when you're writing. Alrighty. And it also, I find it's important to understand and know the assessment criteria, how you're going to be assessed for this exam so that you can, when you're practicing, you will understand, okay, I need to work on this criteria or this criteria. So let's just look at the criteria as we go. First of all, task response. That is just how well you answer the question, whether you've answered all parts of the question, whether you've addressed everything in the question, that is for task response. Then you have lexical resources, where the examiner is looking to see whether you use a wide range of vocabulary. Then you have coherence and cohesion, where the examiner is looking at how well your answer is structured, your uses of paragraphs, your use of paragraphs, and whether you have the correct punctuation, as well as that goes for grammatical range and accuracy, whether you're presenting a good range of grammar. All right, so it's important to know these things while you're practicing and when you go into the exam so that you can kind of tick off your checklist that, okay, I've addressed each of these criteria. All right, now let's move on to the types of questions that you could find in the writing task 2. All right, you have 5 different ones that are very common that you'll see, and out of which you'll get one of them. So the first one would be agree or disagree. So you might have a statement or a question where you'd have to present your opinion. So here it's agree and disagree. The next one is advantages and disadvantages, weighing out the points, pros and cons, basically. The next one is what we call problem and solution. So that you'll be presented with a problem and then you'd have to give a solution, kind of weigh out the answer again. The next one is just like a discussion, again, presenting your opinions and having a discussion about a topic. And last but not least, 2-part questions, which is what we're going into today. All right. So let's learn how to answer 2-part questions of the IELTS writing exam. First of all, let's understand what 2-part questions are. So what are 2-part questions? 2-part questions in the IELTS, with regards to the IELTS exam, is basically you'll get a question, you'll have a statement, a lead-in statement, as they say, and then you'll have one question and then a second question. So let's look at this in more detail. Here are some examples. First of all, here we go. In education and employment, some people work harder than others. Why do some people work harder? Is it always a good thing to work hard? So with this example, you have the lead-in statement, which is in education and employment, some people work harder than others. So that is just giving us an idea as to what the question is all about and kind of giving us a little starting sentence or a starting thought for us as well. Then we move on to the first part of the question, which is why do some people work harder? That's question number 1. And then question number 2, is it always a good thing to work hard? All right, so that's example number 1. Same thing for example number 2. You have your lead-in statement. Happiness is often considered difficult to define. Why is this? Question number 1. And then the next question, what factors determine happiness? All right, and then one more example just to get it in there. Success is often measured by wealth and material possessions. Question number 1, do you think wealth is the best measure of success? And question number 2, what makes a successful person? Sorry. All right, so now you can see the example of everything. You have your lead-in statement, all right, and then you have question number 1 and question number 2. So this is how 2-part questions work in the IELTS writing, for the IELTS writing exam, task 2, okay? So usually, again, Same thing. All right. But before we get into how to write, learning how to write these questions, let's look at some of the common mistakes so that we can avoid it when we're writing. All right. So mistake number one would be that we are not answering both questions fully. So we see the question, we see the lead-in statement, we see both the questions following it. And when we're writing, we might be under pressure. We might have spent a little bit more time on task one, that we might have a little less time on task two. So we miss out maybe the first question or the second question, or we might not know how to answer the first question and or the second question. So we'll just pick one question to answer and we'll submit our answer. The problem with this is if you do that, you will lose marks when it comes to the criteria of task response or task achievement, right? Because you're not answering both parts of the question. So make sure that when you are attempting this during your practice sessions as well, that you have answered both parts of the question. All right, so that's mistake number one, and the solution for that. Mistake number two would be not outlining both answers in the introduction. Now, as we go along in this talk, we'll be learning how to write the introduction, learning how to write the body paragraphs as well. But in the introduction, it's very important that you put in both the answers in the introduction. Now, when we say both answers, we're taking the question and we're putting that in the introduction. I'll explain more in a bit. All right. Number three, mistaking it for one of the other essay types. So what happens is when we see two-part questions, it's very easy to feel like maybe this is kind of like an opinion question. Or maybe this is kind of like an advantage, disadvantage, pros and cons, problem and solution. It's easy to get confused as to which kind of question it is. So each question of task two in the writing exam has to be answered in a little different way. It might look the same and it might read the same, but the way you answer it is slightly different. So do make sure that you analyze the question. Make sure you understand that, okay, in this case, it's a two-part question. If it's something else like a problem solution, make sure you understand what type of question it is so that you can answer it in the way it's supposed to. And last but not least, getting carried away. Often it's very easy for us, especially in this writing task too, and since we're looking at two-part questions, it's very easy to get carried away when we're writing this because first of all, we might have so much that we have to write that we would like to write, or we're developing so many ideas that we want to add so many things. The problem here is that you have 250 words and 40 minutes. So if you take so much time to write that, you might be losing out time, or you might not get what you want to, you might not have added whatever you want to add in your answer, and it becomes a little incomplete, or it tapers off into something incomplete. There's no cohesion and coherence. So there you lose marks. So make sure that you have points and it's very simple and that they're developed correctly and that your answer is pretty short and concise as well. Again, we'll be looking at it when we're talking about the body paragraphs, so bear with me. All right. So here, it's important to understand an essay structure that you can use during your exam so that you can use this and you can just plan it as well as when you're practicing, plan out how your essay is going to be structured so that you know how much to write in each, what to put in each, and then you can have a full structured answer. All right. So first of all, the introduction, then paragraph one, main body, question number one, paragraph two, main body, question number two, and conclusion. All right, so in the introduction, you are looking at paraphrasing the question and outlining the sentence. All right, so it should include the question and a little outline as well. So you have, your starting introduction, you're coming into the topic, and then paraphrasing the question. So don't directly pick out the question and put it in your introduction because there you lose marks. If you paraphrase, it shows the examiner that you understood the question and you understood how to translate it in a different way as well. All right. Then for paragraph 1 and 2, you have topic sentence and the explanation and the example. So you give what you're talking about, your point number 1, you explain that point, and then you give an example. Same thing goes with the paragraph 2, main body question number 2, answering that and going ahead with an example. And then your conclusion, Summarize all the points that you have in paragraph 1 and paragraph 2, and then put that in your conclusion. All right, so now let's practice a question together. Let's get on with it. And this is the question for the day. Here we go. Increasingly, people eat food from other parts of the world rather than local food. What do you think is driving this trend? Is this a good or bad development? So going back to what we looked at just a few minutes ago, let's understand this question. So we have our lead-in statement question, which is, increasingly people eat food from other parts of the world rather than local food. That is your lead-in sentence. So basically, we're going to be talking about food. We're going to be talking about food from other parts of the world and comparing that with local food. All right. First question, what do you think is driving this trend? That's question number 1 that we need to answer. And number 2, is this a good or bad development? All right, so we have our lead-in, we have our 2 questions. This is the 2-part question. Let's learn how to answer it. All right, and then the next part, which is the general bit, give reasons for your answer and include any relevant examples from your own knowledge and or experience. All right, so here we go. Let's go ahead and learn how to write the introduction. All right, so here we have a lead-in sentence again. Nowadays, the majority of the population like to explore a wider range of cuisines going beyond their native cuisine. All right, that's our first sentence. Next, there are a number of factors which contribute to this increasing trend. I believe that although it has a number of disadvantages, it is a good development. This essay will delve into the reasons and will manifest the positive and negative effects of this trend with relevant Indian-based examples. All right, so let's just look at this example for a minute. We have, and I'll put the question, the original question as well. The original question, let's just read that as well. Increasingly, people eat food from other parts of the world rather than local food. What do you think is driving this trend? And is it a good or bad development? So what we've done is we've paraphrased the question. So we've said, nowadays, the majority of the population, we've paraphrased and we use a synonym. Instead of people, we use majority of the population. Okay, and we said like to explore a wider range of cuisines going beyond their native cuisine. All right, so we've targeted other parts of the world as well as local. Instead of saying local food, we've said native cuisine. All right. And then we've gone on to develop it a bit further. There are a number of factors which contribute to this increasing trend, putting in question 1. And then is it a good or bad development? We've kind of put our opinion in there a little bit and said, although that there are disadvantages, it is a good development. And this essay will delve into the reasons and will manifest the positive and negative effects of this trend with relevant Indian-based examples. So here we're telling the examiner that we're going to talk about these reasons, and it's going to talk about the positive and negative effects as well, using relevant examples. Like the question had asked, using relevant examples, we are just putting in a bit more specific and taking it, since we're in India, using Indian-based examples. All right. Now, moving on to paragraph 1. Introduction is paragraph 1, but then the next paragraph where you're developing your ideas, right? All right, so let's look at this. First of all, a factor that could be driving this trend is how people are looking to satisfy their taste buds with something different every day. Having the same type of cuisine every day becomes a bit boring and mundane. I, for one, coming from a South Indian household where the staples are rice, a curry, vegetables prepared in the traditional way, tend to get bored. I tend to get bored consuming it on a daily basis. So continuation of thought. I am always interested in trying new cuisines and also learning about different cultures through food. In a world where we are spoiled for choice, especially in terms of food, I would definitely go out to a restaurant to try something new or order in, which brings me to the next driving factor as to why we choose to eat internationally rather than eating local. Big chunk of text, but let's go through it one by one. So we have our starting sentence, which is, first of all, a factor that could be driving this trend is how people are looking to satisfy their taste buds with something different every day. That's our opening statement for paragraph 1 to introduce the idea as to why the factors that are changing this question. Okay, so here I'd like to point out this, first of all, this is a good run-in word to use, and it would definitely boost your score as well. Okay, because when you use these kind of words, it will boost your score, and the running words and connecting words and things like that, it shows the examiner that you understand grammatically, and it boosts up your lexical resource score. So do add these in appropriately, of course. Again, so first of all, a factor. So we have the run-in sentence. Now we've given the explanation. Why is it, why are people looking to satisfy their taste buds? Because, and I've given a personal example as well, coming from a household, a South Indian household, I find it boring, and also people would find it boring and mundane to eat the same food every day. So that is the explanation to the first sentence. And we've also given the example as well, where the household where it's staples, where the rice staples are rice and curry and vegetables. So we've given that example. What we've also done is we've used a bit more more developed sentence and put it in there as well as a filler. In a world where we are spoiled for choice, especially in terms of food, I would definitely go out to a restaurant to try something new or to order in, which brings me to the next driving factor. So this brings you into the next paragraph. So you have a running sentence so that your first paragraph is continuing to the second one. So cohesion and coherence comes into play here, and you have that running in sentence. All right? Okay, so let's look at paragraph 2. All right, second of all, in the last 5 to 7 years, the food tech and food industry has taken off and provided us with a large range of cuisines to choose from, bringing us to the second factor. Instead of having or taking the time to cook a meal, we reach for our phones to order food, as we have more options to explore. For the food tech industry and our society, this is a good development, not only because it's contributing to the Indian economy, but also that it provides a wide range of choices delivered fresh at our doorsteps. Okay, let's just pause there and look at this. All right, so we brought in another factor, which could also be included in the first paragraph, but since we're bringing in another factor, I think it's appropriate to bring it into a second paragraph. All right, so we're developing our second idea, and that is, since we have, the food tech industry has developed, we can just get food at our doorstep. So that's another reason why, because we are spoiled for choice and we have more options. So that's probably another factor as to why people choose to eat international or food around the world rather than eating their local food. All right, now here we've also included the downside of it, or the disadvantage, because the second part of the question asks us, is it a good thing or a bad thing? So now let's just look at this. This can also be another paragraph. Okay, you don't necessarily have to have 4 paragraphs, you can have 5, but hold on, let's just read this first. The major downside to both these factors would be that it could cause health issues, as eating out every day for the majority of the month or the year is not healthy, as well as if you're ordering, especially if you're ordering fast food, for example, or it can add to your monthly expenses. So we've given 2 downsides as well. We've given the positives and the negatives, but then again, don't get confused and think that this is an advantage or disadvantage kind of question. It's a 2-part question, but we've answered it in such a way that it looks like an advantage disadvantage question. But we've made sure that we've answered both parts of the questions. We've talked about the factors and we've talked about the good and bad things about it. All right. Okay. Now moving on to the conclusion very quickly, because again, we have 40 minutes when we're writing this exam. So make sure you have your points down and then go to the conclusion. And as we discussed, the conclusion is basically just summarizing your ideas that you talked about in the paragraphs before. So here our conclusion, and you can start with, in conclusion, though eating food from around the world could cause health issues or burn a hole in your pocket, okay, I'll read the first bit first. Burn a hole in your pocket. If eaten on a daily basis, it is still a great development, as it contributes to the economy, as well as it allows people to explore and gain more knowledge about other cultures and cuisines. All right, so that conclusion is just summing up what we discussed in the paragraphs before. So we brought in a different way. We've talked about the disadvantages first, and then we've said, okay, but here it is. This is another reason why it could be good. So we've summed up the points, because And paragraph 2 and or 3, as we discussed, it could be before, we said that the disadvantages are that it could cause health problems, and if you eat out on a daily basis, it could be expensive. So that's what we mean by burn a hole in your pocket, or it could cause health issues. So we've addressed that, we've summed that point up. And then we've also said it is a great development because it contributes to the economy. As we discussed in paragraph 2, we said that the food industry and the food tech industry has boomed because of this, because it provides us options. And so that's why it's contributing to the economy, as well as it allows people to explore and gain more knowledge about other cultures. So we've tied in point number 1 from the paragraph number 1, saying, where I gave my example of saying, I personally like eating out and trying new dishes because it helps me understand cultures. So I've summed that up in this as well. So we've covered all the points. We've covered question 1, we've covered question 2, we've summed up our points, and we've put everything into our conclusion. All right. So here, what we just need to do is when we're looking through our answer, we need to check whether it's hit the word count. Now I've checked this and it's actually about 300, just a bit over 350 words. Now the only issue with that is if you have the time to write everything, and if you have the time to make sure that everything, whatever you've written, goes together, it's cohesive and coherent, right? Then it's okay. If you have that time, go ahead. The only disadvantages of writing a little bit more than the word count is that you can tend to go off topic, and also your points may not gel well together. So just be aware of that when you're practicing. Make sure you hit the 250 word limit, and anything extra is fine. Make sure you've also completed task number 1 so that you have enough time to complete task number 2. All right, so yes. So again, this is about 350 words. It's fine. There is no penalty if you overshoot the word count. There's only a penalty if you write under 250 words. So just keep that in mind. All right. So before we get on to the audience Q&A, that was basically a way to answer 2-part questions. So make sure, just a quick recap, make sure you have your structure. Make sure you know that the structure is, again, introduction, paragraph 1 will be introduction, paragraph 2, answering question number 1 of the 2-part question, paragraph 3, answering the second part of the question, and then your conclusion. Here and there, you can have a bit more than 4 paragraphs, that's fine, but make sure the main thing is that you've answered both parts of the question. All right, okay then, now going to our Q&A. Go ahead and get your questions going in. All right. Yeah. So just a quick thing about how you will be assessed during the writing exam. What happens is for each of the criteria that I showed you earlier, we had 4 different criteria. So what happens is you will be marked accordingly. You will get a band score between 0 to 9 for each criteria, and that gets averaged out, and then you will be presented with your whole score. Now this works for writing task 1. Again, the same thing, you'll be scored accordingly, and then task 2, and then both of those will be added together, presenting your final score. All right. We have any questions coming in? Okay, again, just going through, just in case if this comes up again, the word count, should you stay, answer the word count, go according to the word count. 250 words is your word count, so make sure you hit that target. Will there be a penalty if you go under the word count? Yes, there will be a penalty. So make sure that when you're practicing, make sure that you know you have a certain way of doing it. If you have your own technique, make sure that you do that technique, so that maybe one technique here I can just give you is that if you're counting your lines, try writing, when you're practicing, see how many words you write on a line and then count your line. So that way during the exam, you're not sitting there and counting every single word, because that is time consuming. So there's a tip for you. Okay. Another question which I saw on our Nbyula website was, can I write in all caps? And also, can I use a pen? So it is advised that you use a pencil. First of all, I'll address that. It's advised that you use a pencil during your exam for all the sections, really, not only the writing exam, for all sections, because what happens is if you use a pen, sorry, a pencil. Use a pencil, because what happens is if you write with a pen, if you make any mistakes, you'll just be striking out the answer and you'll be writing over it, and it just gets a little messy. Whereas if you have a pencil, then it gets easier because you can just erase it and write your answer. So best to write your answers, all of them, for all the sections, in pencil. All right. And also, right, if you're writing in capital letters, I don't think there's an issue with that, but just make sure that your handwriting is legible so that the examiner can read what you have written, because again, you've spent so much time writing your answers, making it perfect. You don't want handwriting to be the thing that brings your marks down, because what happens is if the examiner cannot read what you have written, they will obviously dock points down. All right. Any more questions? Do we have any more questions? All right. Also, guys, you can see that there are many other people joining this talk. So do take time to interact with them after the talk is over. Go connect with them. You can have the opportunity to connect with me as well. And once you connect with me, you'll be able to find out more about the upcoming Nbyula talks and also whatever events are happening as well. So do take that time to do that. All right. Okay, then if we don't have any more questions coming in, we'll just end the talk here. I hope you guys found this talk insightful. I hope you were able to understand how to write two-part questions for the writing exam. If you found this helpful, do share this with anybody else who is practicing for the IELTS exam. If you have friends who are practicing for the IELTS exam, do share it with them as well. Once the recording is available, you will be alerted so that you can go through it again. And yeah, thank you so much for joining today. Have a great day. We'll see you for the next talk.